All right, the votive candles are lit. There's a cup of tea nearby, and you're just in time for season 2, episode 6 of Gold Coast After Dark. We are rapidly approaching the conclusion of the unintended sequel to After Halloween, a fragile thing that can only exist where fragile things are loved. As I'm sure you recall, at the end of the last chapter, I'd had a lengthy conversation with Dennis, the twinkly eyed saxophonist. We had surveyed some of the damage that had been done to the forest. And we made what I could only assume, on what certainly felt like, our final farewells. And I was on the way home. So here, as always, is Mr. Three of Spades to let us know it is time to get started. The return trip home, normally about 20 minutes, took over an hour. I was walking the whole way, pushing my bike along. I took the longer of the two routes available to me because I didn't relish the idea of dealing with the 820 overpass the way I was feeling. I had a vision of struggling up to the midway point, then losing my footing and balance and tumbling down to the bottom of the opposite side, or worse yet, back from the direction I came and having to do it all over again, sort of reenacting the myth of Sisyphus, okay? Well, what I did instead was I went along the service road back east to where there was an underpass where I could go under the A20. So I did that. Now, this added about 50% more distance to how far I had to go, but it was all level ground. So I figured it was an okay trade off. Now, once home, I didn't bother with a cup of tea or a nice hot shower. It was just straight into bed. Before dropping off to sleep, it occurred to me that I hadn't made any arrangements with the crows regarding hand signals as for my availability on any given day. Uh, so what I decided to do was I'd have to make, because I was falling asleep, decided I would make a mental note to take this up with the first crow I saw. Now, the thing about my mental notes is they tend to disappear shortly after being made. Even so, I would trust to the fact that maybe when I saw a crow again, it would trigger something up here. And I would say, oh yeah, give him the wing sign so he know I was about to say something, and then we'd get the hand signal sorted out. Now, come Monday, for reasons beyond my ken, both the faucet and the drain pipe in the kitchen had taken to leaking at some point in the night. Now, there's no real damage. The mess was confined largely to the cabinet under the sink. But it took all morning and a good part of the afternoon to get it all sorted out. I had to get some parts, that sort of thing. So I decided it was too late to make the trip across the A20. So I would use the coming Wednesday, normally my midweek day off, as a makeup day. And that the rest of Monday I might spend watching maybe the 1932 version of The Mummy with the great Boris Karloff. Well, much to my surprise, when I opened the curtains Tuesday morning, there was not a single crow to be seen, not on the picnic table, not under the picnic table, not on the roof of the shed. I looked overhead, no crows. So I went back up here to my study slash studio slash office slash storage space, to this window right over here, where I have a really good view of a tree that's right there, and then a bigger tree across the street, as well as the rooftops across the street. But no crows. So much for my friends keeping an eye on me. So anyway, got things sorted out. A trip to Boogie's Hill began much the same as other rides had taken recently. It was a smooth initial ride, subsequent struggle up the ramp for the 820 overpass. That was new, followed by a midway rest for my breathing to return to some semblance of regularity. As you may recall, one of the things that stumped my doctors was the fact that I could be riding my bike for a couple of hours and at no time experience any breathing difficulties. But now that was showing up too. Anyway, once everything was back in order, I was able to basically coast the rest of the way down the ramp, down the overpass, and right into an avenue of trees. And remember, there are a number of them in this forest. Uh, this particular one was the one that had on the east side, on my right, had the soccer field and the tennis courts, the sports complex. A little farther up on the left was a dog exercise and training area. No, neither was in use on this particular morning. Well, if the absence of crows had been the first indication that something was, if not wrong, certainly not right, the second was to be found no more than 50 feet from where this avenue intersected with the paved walking, jogging, biking path that I took to get around to Boogie's Hill. There was a barricade, three 12 by 1 boards, meaning 12 inches wide, 1 inch thick, attached to a galvanized steel frame, steel tubing. All the boards painted white and with a sign in the middle, a pan-European traffic sign, a red circle with a red line diagonally through it from about 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock, which means no entry. That was it. No other sign, no form posted explaining what was going on, just no entry. Well, now I've been in the country long enough to know that Dutch joggers and cyclists are rarely deterred by such signs. Now, and as a legal resident, remember I'm a U.S. citizen, but I'm a legal resident of the Netherlands. I had no desire to let the sign down, and therefore I chose to ignore this sign and the barricade for as long as I could get away with it. Any other ones that show up, I'd just swing around them too, and I would continue to do so until I reached an impasse. Now, though the entrances to several intersecting trails used by off-road cyclists were blocked, the main path remained clear. I got to Boogie's Hill and I dismounted as I normally do, pushed my bike up to the crest of the hill. It took me a while. I had to catch my breath again. A new and unwelcome development. And after once more expressing my gratitude to the universe, I turned and looked to the east, the direction of the initial cutting of the forest. The construction crews, or more accurately, the deforestation crews, had been busy since last Friday. All the trunks looked to have been cut into 10 to 15-foot long sections and were stacked in orderly fashion, all about the clearing, just ready for somebody to come pick them up. I had assumed the branches had gone into chippers simply because I didn't see any, and there was no trace of the burn piles, without which no American construction site is complete. Well, when I'd had all of this I could stomach, I walked my bike down the west side of Boogie's Hill back to the path, where I would turn right, which in a short while would take me to the avenue of trees. But the moment I took that right turn, found myself faced with, yes, another wood and steel sign with its no entry message. Well, having come this far without incident and seeing nothing to denote the presence of construction workers, their equipment, or more importantly, security guards, I saw no reason not to continue as I had begun. In a few minutes, I had reached the entrance to the avenue of trees. and another barricade. Well, feeling no more inclined to obey this directive than I had the first two, I began the familiar glide down the avenue. Now, about a third of the way, the trees on my left, which at that point had formed about a 50-yard deep buffer zone between the forest proper and a small gated community, had disappeared. These were predominantly birches, and stacks of their slim trunks, uh, cut to what no doubt was a convenient length, lined the paved path again, stacked up, just waiting for somebody to come along and pick them up. Once again, there were no branches to be seen, only the stumps were left, and they were cut as close to ground level as possible. If nothing else, the clear cut was symmetrical, 50 yards by 50 yards, a perfect square. Well, I continued down the avenue, and no more than a minute's rides further, I came to a second clear cutting, this time on my right. I stopped, dismounted, walked my bike along as slowly as if I was part of New Orleans' funeral procession. The cut, as with the previous cut, approximately 50 yards wide, ran due south before curving to the southwest and into the direction of, Boogie's Hill. Two smaller cuts broke off from the main, one due south, the other due east. Now, there's no telling where they ended up, but wherever that turned out to be, I was sure the forest would end up as the loser. Well, a little further on, I stopped again. With the absence of anything resembling a recognizable landmark, I still thought I was probably at the spot where I first heard Dennis's saxophone. Again, there's nothing left but shortcut stumps and stacked tree trunks. Got back on my bike, set off for the far end of the avenue. There would be another 50 by 50 cut on my left before I would get there. Now, at the far end of the avenue, there was a fourth barricade. This one, like the previous one, was situated to prevent access to the avenue. Well, it seems safe to assume there would be another barricade at the far end of this stretch. Well, I'd find out soon enough. Well, I set off, and I reached the second gate and cattle guard, left the paved path, walked my bike through the shorter but more densely canopied avenue of trees there, and came out on the other side. When I got into the open, I hopped on my bike again, rode due west at best possible speed, as they say in naval circles. As I approached the familiar turnoff, I slowed to a stop and thought back to the swath that had been cut through straight off the avenue of trees. I now knew where the cut that broke off to the east terminated. It was easy to follow its path running as it did due east from where it broke away from the primary cut. It intersected with the path I was about to turn down at a clean 90-degree angle, from which point it was obvious a heavy tracked vehicle had taken a left turn, straddled the path as it went. Its destination and what it did when it arrived there was equally obvious. Most obvious of all, though, and painfully so, that Dennis had been wrong. Time had existed in the forest, and at some moment in the past 3 days, it had run out for the oak tree, every living thing within 30 yards on either side of it. There were no flashbacks, no stream of images accompanying my steps. I was beset instead by a wash of sounds as I pushed my bike along. Now for support, as much as anything, sounds of my shoes on the path, the slow roll of the bike's off-road tires, and the rhythmic rub of the rear tire against the left brake pad due to a slightly bent rim. The wheeze of each breath getting louder. And when I couldn't see or hear but felt, I was becoming increasingly weak and wobbly. I tried walking taller, failing in an attempt to straighten and stiffen both my back and my legs. A black wing feather passed through my field of vision, just landing on a path a few feet ahead of me, and I looked to the sky and watched as a dozen or more crows wheeled and swooped above me in silence. I made no attempt to pick up the feather for fear of collapsing and being unable to rise again. As tears began to course down my cheeks, I felt every vibration of every step, from the soles of my feet to the crown of my head, each step producing a dull thud inside. I not only felt it, I could hear it. A few minutes, I sat on the stump of what 3 days before had been a grand and noble oak. I closed my eyes to stem the flow of tears, felt a wind I could not hear, felt a pressure building, and such a sadness. Everything hurt, and so much sadness. And breathing, it seemed, had become a luxury. It's Mr. Jack of Hearts. It's not dancing. See you again.